So we just got a new selection pack, Geas of the Light. And what even is a Geas, I don't really know. But yeah, let's do a tier list involving all of these new cards that we just got. And as always, feel free to leave a comment if you disagree with any of my placements of any of these decks, or if there's a deck that I didn't include in here that you think I'm missing. And also, if you're viewing this video 3 weeks in the future, tell me how many of these placements that I got wrong. You know, I always love that. And yeah, let's cover the new cards first and see if any of these are worth pulling in the selection pack for. And oh boy, well, we're starting off strong. Here's the thing with a lot of these decks, these new decks from this selection pack, is that there's not very much data to go off of from the TCG or the OCG, because these decks simply just have not gotten results from many tournaments. Like not just YCS or anything, like even regional level results. Like it's barren. Like you go on Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta and you can hardly find anything. So I don't know if these decks are really that bad. You know, there's a chance that they are, but also I wouldn't even know. Like there isn't even really a proper way or like a agreed upon way to build these decks. Like Shining Sarcophagus, for example, this deck has no data because nobody has done well with this deck, so we don't even know where to start to build with this. And I know it's definitely not pure because these cards are not good enough to build a pure deck with. I've been seeing people, you know, run a Horus engine with this because that runs the other sarcophagus. So we know what's better than one sarcophagus. We're running 2 sarcophagi. That's the plural, right? Sarcophagi, sarcophaguses, gussies, whatever. But yeah, I heard Dragoon is good in this deck, which we can't do in Master Duel because it's banned. So I'm not really sure where to go with this. Cashier cards, like at that point, if you're playing Cashier and Horus cards with the Shining Sarcophagus, what is the point of having the Shining Sarcophagus cards in here? I don't know. Yeah, this could be. This is probably the worst deck out of the new selection pack, unfortunately. And yeah, following that we have Flame Swordsman, and Flame Swordsman. This is some Peeps type shit. Okay, so Peeps Yu-Gi-Oh loves playing some of the most dog water decks in Yu-Gi-Oh, and Flame Swordsman was one of his old faves, and I'm not sure why, to be honest, because this is another deck that barely has any results, so we don't even know if people are building this properly. But I know there's an option where you can just put this with like Isolde and other Fire Warrior monsters in the Infernoble cards, and then you just play this as additional Fire Warriors to make Isolde with. But I mean, at that point, does that really count as a Flame Swordsman deck? You're just building another Isolde deck with slightly different main deck cards, or you're just swapping warriors, one type of warrior for another type of warrior. So, but like if you want to play Flame Swordsman straight up, this deck is basically like a blind second deck. It has a bunch of battle phase cards that like increase attack and lets you do a ton of battle damage, which is like, what a great timing to release this right after. The pack right after Tenpai, which is like an infinitely better going second deck that has way more room for non-engine. And another problem with playing a blind second deck in a format where the most played deck is a blind second deck is that you end up quote unquote losing a lot of coin flips because you match up against Tenpai and then they make you go first if you lose the coin flip, which is like that removes like one of the biggest perks of playing a blind second deck in the first place, which is that you're supposed to never win. You're supposed to never lose the coin flip. You're always supposed to go second, but that's not even the case this meta. So I don't know. Like I'm including this. I'm counting this as just if you want to play Flame Swordsman straight up. I'm not counting this as like Isolde Turbo. If you want to include this in Isolde decks, just wherever I rank the Isolde decks in Infernoble, that's where you can assume that these cards would be if you were to run it in that type of deck. But straight up as the actual Flame Swordsman strategy, I don't think this is like even the second best blind second deck in the format. But feel free to send this to Peeps and have him yell at me at how wrong I am. And Next we have Madolche, and I think Madolche is a step up from these two at the very least. Although, I mean, that's probably not saying much. I mean, what a great pack this is. But yeah, again, there's not very much data with Madolche. There's like I couldn't really find many tops in TCG or the OCG with this. But at the very least, Madolche is like a deck that existed, you know, before this support, and this support basically just gives you a stronger end board and a better boss monster to end on. Because quite frankly, your end boards before were kind of mid. Like, your monsters were sticky, you know, they were hard to get rid of and kill, but in terms of actual disruption, I mean, you were mainly depending on like a one promenade, which is like one negate and possibly another bounce to get you through. But like now, you know, the boss monster, it's a non-targeting spin too. It's basically just tiramisu, but a quick effect on your opponent's turn, which is big. And you got the new shop, I believe it's like Madolche Dessert, which is like another bounce that could, you know, potentially high roll, you know, summon another monster from your extra deck. And then what would be really nice for this deck is, you know, Herald of the Orange Light, because you can this deck you can use one Herald multiple times because you can add it back with like Chateau plus like Glass Souffle. But you know, Herald of the Orange Light is still limited at one in Master Duel for some reason. I don't quite get it. I mean, that would be a, you know, there's a couple decks in here that multiple Herald would be very helpful for, this being one of them. But you know what? There's some hopium here, okay? I think Madolche is clearly better than these two. So, you know, hopium, we'll call it a rogue tier deck. Maybe it'll see more success in Master Duel, even though, you know, I don't think this deck really appreciates Maxi that much either, but yeah, we'll see. This is Melodious. This is the new fusion monster, Baka. Okay, I know it's supposed to be pronounced like Baja or Bach, or sorry, excuse my German. Baja, California, Mexico. Whatever. We'll call it Baka from now on to make it easier. But yeah, we finally got the Melody support. This is probably the most the deck that the people were most interested in from this new pack. Quite frankly, it's probably the only deck that most people are interested from this pack. But I'll cover pure Melodious first, because the new Melodious cards enable a splashable engine that you can use in other decks, because now Ostinato is a branded fusion that doesn't lock you into anything, and you can do you get a lot of bodies just from one Ostinato. And obviously, you know, what deck can't make use of free bodies that don't even use normal summon, right? But yeah, what Melodious does with it is you generally end on like a few key endward pieces, like a Schuberta, which is triple DD Crow, and then the new fusion, which is like the flowering well, my French is so bad. Flowering Etoile, the Melodious Magnific Cat. Is this a cat? I don't really know, but yeah, that gives you multiple bounces, and you're also, you know, because it is Melodious, you are ending on the Aria, which is gives all your monsters protection from, I believe it's protection from battle, and it can be destroyed. So it makes your monsters like a bitch to get rid of, and you know, that's pretty decent against Tenpai, because you know, if Tenpai just can't kill your monsters, right? They can't OTK you, right? So simple as that, right? And yeah, there's the decks. It takes some time to play, because it's like a deck that weaves pendulum combos in between your fusion summons. So like it is a bit harder to learn than the average mid-range deck, I'll say. And you know, this is another deck that would greatly appreciate more than one Herald of the Orange Light, because all your monsters are fairies, and you know, negating Maxi and Ash on your Ostinato is very good, on top of just being a very good hand trap. But it's Master Duel, so it is what it is. I will say that this deck never had any success in the OCG. This is like another Unchained moment. Maybe, honestly, it might be because of Maxi, even if OCG has more outs to it, because they probably have, I think they have more Herald of the Orange Lights. But yeah, even in the TCG, well, they did have some success early on and started falling off, you know, in the past few months when more powerful cards got released, you know, like the Fiendsmiths. But you know, we don't have those cards in Master Duel right now, so this could be an okay mid-range strategy. I won't say it's that great or anything. This is probably arguably the best deck from the new pack, and I can't even say it's better than the most established tier 3 decks right now, but I think it's still better than Madoji, so we'll put it here for now. And next card is, well, it's not really a deck, it's one card, which is Nightmare Apprentice, and honestly, this is exactly what Chimera needed. And I think the only deck that plays this is Chimera, because that's the only illusion archetype, but yeah, the problem with Chimera was that it wasn't strong enough, and it didn't have a high enough of ceiling to be played as a pure deck, and there also just weren't enough illusion cards to build a deck pure to begin with, and you had to combine it with other engines, but you know, the other engines that you would put Chimera with in Master Duel are very, very hit by the balance, because you know, Branded, we all know the Branded hits, and Runic, we all know the Runic hits, and those are the two best engines to pair with Chimera. And obviously that's a problem when you have to choose one of those. But Nightmare Apprentice solves all the problems of, well, okay, it's not, I won't say it solves all the problems, but this is everything Chimera could want. This is basically a Die Bellstar for illusions. You discard a card, special summon this, you add any illusion monster. Which, you know, a Rhoda that doesn't cost you normal summon is great. This also, it just triggers on any summon, so you don't have to summon it by its own effect. This can be special summoned by something like a Master Towel or the Birth Mid Fusion, and then you get this summon this, you get the search for free, you don't even have to discard a card. So this adds combo lines, it adds consistency, it adds power. It's just that, and yeah, it's everything Chimera could want. It's just I still think the ceiling of the deck is still too low, especially if you play it pure, because I mean, at the end of the day, you're still just playing a deck that's ending on like a hand loop plus a Guardian Chimera on your opponent's turn, and then, you know, some non-engine, which you know, you can do that more consistently now, and you're more resilient to hand traps, but it's still not that high of a ceiling. This is a deck that really appreciates, you know, the Fiend Snips cards, because they actually let you do a lot more and do a lot more than just the standard Chimera plays. But I will say that the deck is, maybe you can argue maybe it's pushing on the bottom of tier 3. I'll put it in Rogue for now, since the deck honestly hasn't really done much since before this card released. But yeah. I forgot to go over the other decks that Melodious was played in. Whoopsie. So okay, there's two main decks that the Melodious engine is splashed into the most. One of them is Snake Eyes. Yes. Even, I think, honestly, given the state of the hits to Snake Eyes and Master Duel, probably the only viable way to play any sort of quote-unquote pure Snake Eyes is with the Melodious engine, which, I mean, that's not even pure Snake Eyes at that point. At that point, you're running more Melodious cards in your deck than you are playing Snake Eyes cards. So we'll say Melodious Snake Eyes. Especially since Snake Eye Die Bellstar is finally in the game. I don't know what took them so long. Were they that afraid of pure Snake Eyes being a meta threat with all these hits? I don't really know, but yeah, what the Melodious engine does for Snake Eyes is that Ostinato is a one card Snake Eyes combo, because you get like it summons 2 level 4s, and then the 2 level 4s obviously you can use to go to Infernal Flame Banshee, which then adds Poplar, which then does, you know, full Snake Eyes combo. And the deck needs that, because with 1 Poplar, 1 Ash, 2 Bonfire, 1 Wanted, the deck is very lacking on starters. So the extra amount of starters, I believe Refrain is also another starter. So the Melodious package, even though it takes up a lot of room, it adds 6 starters to the Snake Eyes deck, which it's consistency this deck really needs. And also, it's not even you don't even have an issue fitting these in, because I mean, all your cards are on the ban list, so like it's not like deck space is a problem in this deck. So yeah, it's definitely a boost to Snake Eyes. It's not gonna make any. It's not better than Fire King Snake Eyes, you know. So it's not gonna be too crazy, but it does make at least pure Snake Eyes. I keep saying pure. It's really just Melodious Snake Eyes. It makes the Snake Eyes without the Fire King cards playable again. And the other way to The other main deck that uses the Melodious cards or splashes them in is Supreme King, and it's cool because the Ostinato also resolving an Ostinato also gets you scales, which it's helpful for a pendulum deck, and Baka. Baka. The fusion here is level 7, so it helps you go into Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon into the Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon place. You get oftentimes an extra negate on boards, and you could let you get a negate on board early in combos where you draw Ostinato, so it lets you play around hand traps better. Now, unlike Snake Eyes though, Supreme King is a deck that doesn't have all its starters on the ban list, so the space is actually a real issue for including the Melodious cards. And one of the main perks of Supreme King is that it's the pendulum deck that has room for the most non-engine. But obviously, if you're playing the Melodious engine in it, you're increasing your ceiling, but you're also cutting your non-engine for it, which is like the biggest perk of playing Supreme King in the first place. I don't know whether pure Supreme King or Melodious Supreme King is going to be the better version. Unlike Snake Eyes, where obviously Melodious Snake Eyes is going to be the best non-Fire King Snake Eyes variant, but I'm not sure about if Supreme King really gets improved too much by adding the Melodious cards or not. Maybe in the 10x format, solidify your going first place, make your going first stronger. It's definitely a possibility. Yeah, we'll put these around same level here. I think Supreme King is still probably a bit better than Snake Eyes in general, just because pure Snake Eyes banless hits. Yeah. So back to the new cards, we got Live Twins, and this is gonna be Live Twin Sprite. Live Twin Sprite is, I think, really the only way you can play Live Twins competitively in the Master Duel format right now, and we can compare and contrast this with the other Sprite decks too, since we did get a ban list, quote-unquote ban list, and nothing got unbanned. It was an unbanned list, and Sprite Starter came to 3, so that was above the Sprite decks. And yeah, I'd say Live Twin Sprite is probably, unfortunately, out of these 3 Sprite decks here, Live Twin Sprite is still probably the weakest of these 3 Sprite decks. It has the lowest ceiling, and yeah, it has basically the lowest ceiling. You have Tri-Brigade Sprite, which off of 1 card, you can get like 4 Pleasant Interruptions, IP, Pit Knight, double Dragon Lord, and like a Carrot on field, and you don't even need to run Revolt because, honestly, Revolt is a brick, but you already have 1 card that gets you 4 interruptions, not including any non-engine. Like, that's pretty decent. And then Pure Sprite has the option to run Shifter. Now, Shifter is notably got, relatively worse this format, in a format where, a couple of the higher tier decks that we'll get to later actually run Shifter themselves or aren't affected too much by Shifter. That's less of a boon. But, Pure Sprite is still decent. Sprites, every Sprite deck, even Live Twin Sprite, they play around hand traps really well because, having any bodies on the field lets turns like your entire hand and like half your deck into extenders, so you're always going to play through multiple hand traps. And yeah, if there's one perk about Live Twin Sprite, it's that you can theoretically Scythe Lock with Live Twin Sprite better than the other 2. The problem with Scythe Locking with Live Twin Sprite is that you have to pop the Scythe with your Evil Twin Link monsters, and those are main phase only. So you give your opponent a chance to activate any card in the main phase first before you get a chance to try Scythe Locking, which is a very big problem in a format with Tenpai, because if they go first main phase action, activate Lightning Storm on monsters, or activate Dark Hole or Ageki, you can no longer Scythe Lock them. Or like if your opponent just goes first action, just removes your Evil Twin Link monster at all before you get the Scythe Lock, then it turns off the Scythe Lock. And oftentimes in order to go for the Scythe Lock, you're foregoing the protection from like a Carrot or a Red, for example, like say from a Bistio or a Called by the Grave, unless your hands are really crazy. But yeah, you can Scythe Lock in theory. It's not too reliable. You will do it more often than you can probably get it off more often than you don't, then you get stopped. But it's not really the most consistent strategy if you just tunnel for Scythe Locking. But We'll say, you know what? Because the alt arts came, and you know, power of the alt arts, the UR alt arts. We'll put this in tier 3 for now, at the bottom of tier 3, below the other two sprite decks though. And Silva got unbanned, so Dark World. um, even though it sounds degenerate, I mean, Silva is degenerate. The thing is, I don't think it made the deck that much better, because at the end of the day, if you got to a point where you could Silva hand loop your opponent, you're probably winning the game one way or another with Dark World. Like, the main niche of playing Dark World right now is that like when you match up against Tenpai, you just FTK them, and you one of your like auto win combos where you draw your entire deck, or you make them draw their entire deck, they max you. Like, basically, it's just to punish the blind second decks that are making you go first. So in that sense, you should have already had like a win con pre-Silva, I think. I still think it's obviously Silva helps, you know, it makes your like turn 1 play much simpler when you can just hand loop your opponent instead of, you know, summoning a bunch of times, ending on a board full of negates. But Silva doesn't change the viability of the deck so much. That's why they probably unbanned it. Like, you will get hand looped by Dark World more often now, and that's like toxic, but it is what it is. It's not going to be that much of a meta threat unless you specifically queue in, unless you're specifically queuing against Dark World with Tenpai and making them go first. Then yeah, deserved, right? Speaking of Tenpai, so now we'll get to the tier 1 decks. So Tenpai, there's a lot of decks you could argue are the best deck in Master Duel right now. Like, I wouldn't say Tenpai is tier 0 or anything, or legitimate best deck. I will say that I'll just put Tenpai first on the list, because Tenpai is by far the most played deck in the game. I mean, it's literally has like 4 to 5 times as much usage as the next most played deck, or something close to that. So even if it's not the definitive best deck in the format, we'll just treat it as so, because just by the sheer number of people that play it, and you know, oftentimes the deck's viability in this format is based on how well it matches up against Tenpai. So yeah, it's a good starting point as like the top deck we'll put here in tier 1. And next deck, the following few decks I'll put here are the next tier 1 decks that you could argue or have an argument to be better than Tenpai. But I mean, there's no way to really make a definitive statement about which of these is the best deck right now, so I'll just go through them one by one. And next one is something that I was wrong about in the last tier list, which is Ritual Beast. So Ritual Beast has an argument to be the best deck in the format, because it literally got the top rated placement in the rating duels with over 1900 elo. I mean, Jesus Christ. And I think it's like hinged on the fact that it has a really good Tenpai matchup. You could make the argument that a lot of people don't know how to play against Ritual Beast at first in the first month, because it's a new deck and it's a complicated deck, and Imperm on Elder, lol. But the fact that it got that high in rating duels means that I don't think that's really the case, because if you're that high elo in rated duels, everyone's a good player, everyone will know what deck you're doing, and people are literally teching against Ritual Beast in the top elo. So yeah, I won't say this deck got too much of a buff from, well, you know, your opponents just yellow button clicking their hand traps versus you. But yeah, when Tenpai makes you goes first, you set up you can Protoss Lock, Call Fire, you can Colossus, you can do that, but the top deck didn't even play either of those. And it played Shifter too, which is not even like the complete blow versus Tenpai, but just the board is sets up by itself, which is like a Raritari, how do you even pronounce that? The Link monster plus an Altai Guy Pelio as like an Omni Negate, and then I think it ended on Baguska too, or potentially Bagusa was somewhere on the end board, or maybe it was just the Maxi counterplay too. But yeah, the point is that even without the floodgates, still has a very good win rate versus Tenpai going first, because this deck can play through hand traps pretty well, and if you can play through hand traps, and you put a respectable board where Tenpai can't kill you, that's often good enough. as you'll see in maybe some other decks. And next is Yubel, which is so Yubel kind of fell off a little bit. I don't think it got that much worse. Honestly, I think this is just new toy syndrome. Like people wanting to play Tenpai and Virtual Beast more than Yubel. And the fact is Yubel got, I won't say okay, there was a ban list. It did you did lose a couple starters, which, okay, losing Dark Beckoning Beast and Spirit Gates is not that big of a deal because you just replace them with Pure Rise map, but losing the Phantom from 3 to 2 is kind of it matters. But also you actually summon Sork, so you got a slight buff there. Now every hand you have basically can lead to Yubel combo, even the hands of just Dark Beckoning Beast, so that's nice. And this is another deck that has a good matchup against Tenpai, you know, because a fan of Yubel goes through second summoning. Now, if your opponent is playing Boardbreaker Tenpai, that might be a little bit problematic because, you know, Dark Hole, Raigeki, Lightning Storm, you don't have any spell negates on your end board, so you could get blown out by like multiple board breakers. But the board breakers are less common than the hand traps. Hand trap Tenpai is much more common simply because of the mirror match. You know, if Tenpai plays a mirror match and you're made to go first and all you have are board breakers in your hand, you might as well just go next. You're not going to survive, you're just going to lose. But if you have hand traps, at least you have a chance. So because of that, you know, Yubel matches much better against hand trap Tenpai. You can still end on a Phantom and like maybe a Rage through a few hand traps, and then, you know, it gets really hard to kill you, especially through a Spirit of Yubel if they can't get to their Transcendence, which it's really hard to get to that through a Yubel end board. So, and yeah, Yubel, and against every other deck, you know, that's not Tenpai and doesn't play a massive amount of board breakers, Yubel going first is still one of the strongest going force end boards in the game. So you could argue it's better than Ritual Beast, or you could argue any of the decks in like any order, and you know, that would be a legitimate argument. It did get one out of the 10 spots in the top rated duel, so I feel like that's still probably a bit more due to usage than how good the deck actually is. Yeah, speaking of Fire King Snake Eyes, so I think this is probably the most underrated deck in the game right now. It's not the best, it's probably not the best deck in the game, but I think this is still solidly a tier 1 deck, and literally no one's playing this right now. It's unbelievable. I played against like one Fire King Snake Eyes all of last month. I don't understand why. This deck is still crazy. I gave it a spin, and this deck also has a very good Tenpai matchup, because even though you would think you might struggle against board breakers because you don't put up any negates, but your end board that you usually end on with Fire King is super resilient to board breakers, because like you're gonna have a Sanctuary, and your field is gonna have combinations of like Sanctuary, Ambler Whale, and an Appaloosa on field, and the Appaloosa is always made with IP. So, you know, what's your opponent gonna Lightning Storm? What are you gonna Dark Hole, right? You're gonna Dark Hole the Ambler Whale that I was gonna pop anyways, so I could revive my IP. You can't destroy my Appaloosa with, you know, your board wipes. You're gonna Lightning Storm. You can't Lightning Storm my Fire King Island because Sanctuary protects it. So, yeah, and also even droplets, like half my interruptions are in the grave. So it's either you droplet my board now and lose to the interruptions in grave, such as, you know, the IP or the Garunix, or you wait until I use the stuff from grave, but then you have to eat a bunch of Appaloosa negates, and then even then you're using like 3 to 4 cards off your droplet, so you only have like 1 to 2 cards left in hand, and then you're gonna lose to the Princess that comes out when you every special summon one of your Tenpai monsters, and then also don't forget Garunix, Quick Xyz in the High on Garunix nuke the field too. Like there's so many disruptions in the grave that, you know, Tenpai with board breakers can't really break through Fire King. I've noticed that, and then it all depends on whether Fire King can play through Tenpai's hand traps or not. And Fire King is deck that's still decent at playing through hand traps. Like honestly, I was playing Fire King a bit. The Poplar going to 1, it felt like it didn't matter at all. Like I was playing Fire King the exact same way I was pre-ban list when Poplar was at 2, which, because, you know, you only ran 2 Poplar before anyways. And when I drew Poplar, I just normal summoned Poplar and did a Poplar combo, and it was fine. So Yeah, this deck hardly sees any play, even though it's still a tier 1 power level deck in my opinion. And speaking of underrated, so if Fire King is the most underrated deck, I think Voice's Voice is the second most underrated deck in the game. Although, quite honestly, it's probably the most underrated deck among TCG players, because TCG players just cannot evaluate Voice's Voice in the context of the Master Duel meta for the life of them. Because for the entire existence of Voice's Voice in the TCG, it was overshadowed by full power and near full power Snake Eyes without any main deck hits, into Fiendsmith Snake Eyes, into Fiendsmith Yubel, all full power by the way. But, you know, in Master Duel, we don't have any of those decks. In fact, as mentioned before, Yubel and Fire King Snake Eyes are among the tier 1 decks. These are the less played of the tier 1 decks. The Ritual Beast and Tenpai are more played in Master Duel, and Voice's Voice has a much better matchup against these two decks than these two decks, Yubel and Fire Kings. And in fact, I would say Voice's Voice has one of the best Tenpai matchups in the game, just because it's probably one of the best decks at playing through hand traps, which Tenpai plays a lot of, and they will just often hand loop themselves into your Voiceless Voice hands. And then even board breakers, so like board breakers matter if they have like 2 to 3 of them, in which case if Tenpai has like 2 to 3 board breakers and you didn't floodgate them, then every deck is losing to that. But Voice's Voice out of all these decks is the one that puts up multiple hard negates. So you have the Skull Guardian obviously, but also you will often go for Pendulum Graph, which is not only a spell negate for possible board breakers, but also it floats in the Meteor Burst Dragon, which is another floodgate against Tenpai. If they burn 2 board breakers on your negates, and then they have to deal with a Meteor Burst protected by barrier afterwards, meaning that they can't attack over it, that's that. And then on top of that, even they deal with your monsters, you still have interruption from the back row in the terms of Radiance. And then you can also stagger when your interruptions hit the board. For example, if you have a Blessing and you have Skull Guardian out, you can use the Skull Guardian negate first, and then Blessing, summon out your Pendulum Graph and get a second negate up. That way they can't board breaker you and blow up both your negates, because they're not on the field at the same time. So there's lots of ways for Voice's Voice to just beat the Tenpai matchup pretty reasonably. And I mean, this deck had the most representation among the top 10 decks in the rated last season. It had 3 confirmed, and I think somebody said that the 4th most played, that the unknown deck in the top 10 was also Voice's Voice. That would put it at 4 Voice's Voice, which would mean that this was the most represented deck among the top 10 decks in rated, which I don't know, sounds like tier 1 material to me. If anyone says that Voice's Voice right now is kind of a mid deck or a bad deck, you have full rights to just ignore anything they say or any of their opinions regarding Master Duel, because they just that is one of the most incorrect statements that you could say, that Voice's Voice is somehow not a good deck this format. Oh yeah, also Max C, that's another thing TCG doesn't have. Voice's Voice plays well into Max C. That's definitely a plus. Also plays well on the Shifter, which is definitely also another benefit, considering these two decks tend to play Shifter quite a bit. And yeah, I see a lot of decks people place above Voice's Voice, and I just don't understand what they see in those decks, or what they're not seeing from Voice's Voice. But I mean, it is what it is. Well, I can do another rant on this in another video if you want. So yeah, let's get on to okay. So another deck I want to mention now is Mathmech. So Mathmech, I'll put it in tier 2. It's not on the power level of these decks, but Mathmech has there's one main perk for playing Mathmech this format. But I mean, what a hell of a perk it is, and that is to farm the hell out of Tenpai. As long as you don't get Maxine or Shifter. If you get Maxine and Shifter, you get cooked. But if you don't, then you make Terahertz, and Terahertz kind of solos the Tenpai matchup. They got to run Kaijus, which I think most Tenpai decks are not running Kaijus, because why would you respect like a tier 2 deck in Math deck, right? But if you don't have Kaijus, then terahertz just they can't win, especially since if they make you go first with Math deck, then you can even make an unaffected terahertz if you know you're playing against Tenpai. And you know, with an extra extender, you dump Gachiri and then make terahertz with the Gachiri. So now it's completely unaffected, and it completely floodgates them out of their battle phase. So that's a go next angle right there. Outside of the Tenpai matchup, it's, I mean, honestly, Mathmech when it goes second is basically like Tenpai at home. It just runs a bunch of non-engine and hand traps and tries to OTK you in one turn. Problem is, Mathmech has a lot more bricks and has room for a lot less hand traps than Tenpai does, so obviously it's way worse going second. It's why it's going second win rate is honestly not that great, to be honest. But it has a very high going first win rate, and I wonder why. So, another, speaking of going first win rates, so Branded. There is, you know, Branded, they're Albion locking again. Who'd have thought, you know, banning Puppet, banning Ito, banning Jalgan, but Sanctifier is legal. So now they're moving on to the next lock, which is what is that card called? Yes, DDD Vice King Requiem. Give this to your opponent, and they can't special summon anything but DDD monsters. And what's funny is, because it's a pendulum, it can't be sent to the graveyard for cost. So what that means is that your Tenpai opponent cannot drop away the DDD Vice King Requiem, and they just stay forever locked under it, unless they contribute something over it with their one of Magnum. I guess that's like their out, or like Dark Hole if they run it, which, you know, a lot of Tenpais don't. So, yeah, fun. Who'd have thought? Sanctifier still being toxic after banning 4 targets. They never saw that coming. And also, you know, Brandon also did get buffed from the ban list. You know, recently it got 2 Sark and 2 Brandon opening now, so it is more consistent now. And yeah, it's because Tenpai exists, and now you have a way to invalidate that matchup with Brandon. You know, there you go. Another fusion deck. Tier, I guess like Tier and Brandon always go like next to each other on the forbidden or on the tier list. And this is speaking of pure tier. We can cover the 60 card terrorists later, or the other tier versions. But yeah, tier got noticeably weaker with the banning of Proto Rhino. So it was a pretty harsh hit. Not gonna lie. But there's another deck that it still has a good Tenpai matchup. Like, the thing with these tier 2 decks is that these are still decks that are viable because they have above average matchups versus Tenpai, and they're like just decent elsewhere, like overall anyways. But yeah, what makes tier good against Tenpai is that it has layered interruptions. You know, it's similar to like Fire King, where not everything is on the field at the same time, which means you don't open yourselves up to board breakers. Especially, you know, you imagine Dark holding a tier board, right? And you have a searchable counter trap too, but oftentimes, you know, you have shufflers engraved. This deck plays a lot of mills, so if you mill a Black Goat, that's kinda, sometimes that could alone be enough to hinder Tenpai enough to where they can't kill you. But also you have shufflers, so anytime they go Fadra, you know, you have the shufflers there, or, you know, for against Biden's, it goes beats Sankin Kaiman as well, because it doesn't affect, or what's the second time? It's Sankin Summoning as well, because shufflers don't interact with stuff on the field. There's also Snow, and like Snow booking their first monster does a hefty amount of them. Also, like, you can if you get like Max Seed, you can go Kikolo's Soliac Pass or Kikolo's Meta Noise Pass, book their monster, go into a Rokalos, and then that checks their Sankin Kaiman. Like, there's a lot of ways, like, tier just layers interruptions enough to where Tenpai can't overcome it. So yeah, besides the shifter problem, obviously if you get shifter, that's a shifter, that's a certified shifter moment. And yeah, although admittedly this deck, again, the Pro Rhino hit, lost a bit of power, lost a bit of consistency, but it's still solid in my opinion. And for, I guess we can go through some other decks now. So Kashira is a deck that I think is boy, this is not a good meta for Cashier, because this deck is solely is rogue solely because Tenpai exists. I don't know how the hell Cashier beats Tenpai actually, since they don't really care about a rise art, and if they run any board breakers at all, you're cooked. If they hand trap you multiple times, you can't even get the rise heart, so you're ending on like a Fenrir or like a unicorn, which I mean Tenpai doesn't really care about that. Like the only way I see Tashira actually beating Tenpai, and in practice this is what usually happens, is like you play a lot of go first cards. You know, you play a lot of floodgates, you play a lot of solemns. So if you draw enough of those, then that's how you beat Tenpai. But that's not like Cashier isn't the only deck that can play Solemn Judgment and Floodgates, okay? So like it's not unique to Cashier. Literally any deck in here you can play those cards or some like form of those cards and beat Tenpai with those cards anyways. You know, that doesn't make Cashier good. It just means that like literally every deck can still do Cashier's job better. But yeah, if you play against non-Tenpai, I guess sometimes it's okay. Although I mean Ritual Beast also not caring about the grave is a bit rough. And if you go second against any of these decks, like Fire King Snake Eyes, you're not beating Fire King Snake Eyes or Yubel going second either. And yeah, this is not a great meta for Kashtira. And since we covered Math Mech already, we can cover the other Cybers decks. I guess I'll put these together. So Adagnister and Salamangreat are probably the next two best Cybers decks, and these are probably only the three Cybers decks worth mentioning in terms of like a tier list right now. And the problem with Adagnister is that it's really hard to put Terahertz in Adagnister. Like the extra deck space is tough, and if you don't end on Terahertz, you end on like 2 or 3 firewalls. That actually makes you very vulnerable to Tenpai, because if they go Sangan summoning, it makes it really awkward. And also like Sangan summoning is not a hard once per turn, so if you bounce back the Sangan summoning with like the singularity, they can just play the Sangan summoning again. It's really annoying like that. Yeah, I would say it's worse than Math Mech, this format, just because it lacks a consistent way to deal with spell traps, which is you need spell and trap removal to be or like some form of way to interact with Sangan summoning like profitably, which I'm not quite sure Adagnister has right now. Yeah, that's why I'll put it a tier below Math Mech. And Salamangreat is surprisingly its board seems kind of weaker compared to the other Cybers decks, because you probably don't want to run Pyro Phoenix just because there's a lot of hand traps going around, and it's hard to get into Pyro Phoenix combo through multiple hand traps. But even just ending on Raged Roar, Princess, and a Searched Ash, which is like the max combo you can get with Salad, that's often enough. That's enough to beat most decks, quite frankly. It's going second. It's a bit of a struggle, because unlike the other two Cybers decks, you actually don't have that much room. You don't have as much room for non-engine. I think I only was managed to be able to fit like 13 or 14 in 41 cards, not even 40 cards. And you lose way harder to removal because your normal summon is so important that if you don't have a mining or a circle for mirror, sometimes literally a trap hole can end your turn, or an SP can end your turn. SP on the Balinks, which is really annoying. So there's that. But at very least, its board is like, because you run a counter traps to counter Tenpai's board breakers, and you run Rage, which is a way to interact with Sangan in summoning. You actually have a decent match, and you search Ash for a Sangan Kaiman, so you actually have a decent matchup into Tenpai if you get your board off. So that's actually pretty decent. And Fire King Snake Eye was like one of your worst matchups, and this, these decks that are strong going first, and you're probably not going to beat going second, these decks are less common now. So yeah. And Isolde. Okay, so back to Isolde. There's a bunch of decks I want to group together with Isolde. So I'll put them here. Where are they? Okay, so here, Sunseed. What's this? Sunavalon, or plants. We'll say plant pile. Infernoble or Isoda Warrior Turbo, and to a lesser degree Super Heavy Samurai and Monodium. Although I guess you could argue that these are a lot worse than these versions for specific reasons. Since these decks, you can run a 40 card plant deck and have outs to Maxi, or you can run the 60 card plant pile and just completely FTK your opponent going first, which, you know, you're like, Tenpai, make you go first? I bet. Just make an unbreakable board. That's what these two decks do, Plant and Infernoble. So, because you are going first more often, you know, that's a legitimate niche. Super Heavy Samurai and Monodium, they have the same goal, but they're less consistent in doing so. Monodium, because, you know, the hit the Pro Rhino actually weakened it quite a bit to where it's not as resilient into hand traps, and it's also not as consistent to begin with. Although it's not bad, you know. It can play through hand traps. It can play okay going second sometimes. And Super Heavy Samurai, all these variants, they have one problem, which is that not all of them can play Call by the Grave or Cross Out as outs to Max E, or outs the Shifter for that matter. So that's a major problem. And it's not even that Super Heavy Samurai is like less consistent because it has less starters. It's also less consistent because it has less tools to deal with hand traps, which your opponent is going to throw at you a lot. So I guess it might be enough to justify putting these like a tier below. Because these, if you're wanting to play a go first pseudo FTK deck, I think Plants and Infernobles are probably the best ones. None of these decks have really good win rates going second into non-Tenpai decks, which is why they're still down here, in my opinion. But at the very least, you know, having a game plan to beat Tenpai is something that's required in order to be like a playable deck this format. So these decks do have that quality. A deck that doesn't have that quality is Goblin. So Big Gabanga. So I was not actually aware of how much Goblin support we were actually missing still in Master Duel. Specifically, kick-ass Goblin Bikers and badass Goblin Bikers, which I guess got translated to Goblin Bikers Gone Wild or whatever. But yeah, especially kick-ass, it adds an important part, and then something important to Goblin Bikers, which is an end board piece that interacts with spell and traps, because that's actually a major issue, because this deck end board often doesn't have any way to interact with spell and trap cards, which is a massive problem because you know, Tenpai, you know, first of all runs board breakers, number two runs Sangan Summoning, and if you don't have a way to deal with the Sangan Summoning when they play it, then obviously you're not in for a very good time. And besides that, it's like this deck has like a decent ceiling, but it has like doesn't have that much room for hand trap. It has like a relatively big engine, like somewhat can be normal summon reliant sometimes. I'm not sure if you even can run this, if it's even best to run Goblin Bikers pure. I'm seeing Goblin Bikers slash with other decks like Evil Eye, which again I'm not sure adding Evil Eye cards is going to be an improvement to your deck. But yeah, this is another deck that would heavily appreciate Fiendsmith cards because it lets you increase the ceiling of your deck when your ceiling is decently low. So yeah, I don't know how really to successfully build this deck in this current format. There might be a way, which is why I'm still keeping it Rogue, although I'm kind of losing a bit of hopium for now. And speaking of, you know, more blind second decks, so I guess we'll get these out of the way now. So Striker and Ancient Gear. Like, again, the problem with going second decks is that you're playing a worse going second deck, and you're losing the coin flip as going second deck more often because of the existence of another going second deck. Like, why would you want to do that to yourself? And especially Striker. So Striker, I'm not sure how you actually win versus Tenpai with Striker. Because if you're made to go first, you just die. Well, obviously. But even if you go second, like, you can't kill Tenpai, right? Unless you run specific text for it, or I don't know if you run Floodgates. I don't know if you, because the Tenpai match is so bad, I don't know if you run a single copy of Threatening Roar that you can get off Thrust just to be able to live a turn. Like, I don't I really am struggling to picture a game state where Striker actually beats Tenpai and your name is not exactly Ryan Yu. Ancient Gear, at least Ancient Gear has an OTK option. Okay? At least if you go second, you should at least have a way to OTK Tenpai. Yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot. Man, I'm just all over the place today. Okay, so the when I mentioned tier and other tier files, okay, the other tier decks. So 60 card terrorist horist. This deck is a lot worse now. It's very funny. Like there with Ken and Gen, you can search grass, and also I've seen some absolutely war crime type of shit with the 60 card files, and whenever they go first, it's disgusting. There's Black Garden to play through and deck your opponent out through a Maxi. You're handling your opponent multiple times with Ken and Gen, which you can Zealantis back to Ken and Gen. There's people are playing Sangan Summoning as a search target off of Rainbow Bridge because Pearl Rhino got banned. That way you can add Genroku, and then Genroku gets summoned as a level 3 or a level 4 tuner. Your choice. People are cooking so hard with this deck, and ultimately the deck is not that good because if you go second and you don't have room for non-engine, but your opponent's gonna do their full thing, so if you play against one of these decks up here, you're gonna have to play through all of their shit, and then your engine is way weaker now to interruption without the Pearl Rhino, and the fact that you're spending a lot of deck space on bricks and funny tech cards like Ken again and Black Garden and all that stuff. So yeah, what often happens is that if you don't open the nuts or you don't open like the few board breakers in your deck, you just lose going second so often. And then also you play the mirror match and you want to just, if you ever play the 60 card terrorist mirror match, like that makes you want to and you go second in that, it makes you want to turn off the game completely because absolutely the worst experience in the entire world is going second in the terrorist 60 card piled mirror match. And yeah, the other tier deck, quote-unquote tier deck, is Lightsworn, and I'm pretty sure most Lightsworn decks are still the FTK variant. It's like, I mean, it's very funny. I think in terms of decks that win going first, I think this is actually above Super Heavy and Monadium because this actually FTKs your opponent. And yeah, so Tenpai makes you go first. They don't draw a shifter. Good luck. You're gonna get FTK'd by the. For some reason, this is still legal. I don't know why they haven't addressed it. It's been like too balanced. They could have just literally just hit the arrow strike and the FTK would be no more. Like, did they think do they want to keep the FTK in the game to keep Lightsworn relevant, quote unquote relevant? I don't understand why this is still legal, but it is still legal. So, yeah. Other than that, obviously. It's an FTK, you're running close to 40 cards most of the time, you don't have room for non-engine, so yada yada, same as always, or whatever, but yeah, FTK some Tenpai opponents. And okay, so the shifter deck. So I already covered 2 shifter decks, one of them was Sprite Bloom, or Sprite, and one of them was Kashira. I guess we can cover the rest now, and by rest I mean the Flu. So basically, the shifter decks, if you're a shifter deck and you're not exactly Ritual Beast or Tenpai, I would say probably don't bother because I mean it's just so much worse. It's Flu. At least Flu, I guess we can put above our Kashira because I do see a world where Flu can beat Tenpai going first. Like your board actually annoys the hell out of Tenpai. More so than a Narisar, which functionally does like close to nothing versus Tenpai. You're still inconsistent as hell, and you still lose the hand traps that are being played. You do lose the board breakers like droplets, which is really annoying. But I mean, yeah, you're a rogue deck for a reason. A shifter against non-Ritual Beast and Tenpai decks is fine, I suppose. Though going second with Flu is also a massive struggle because of lack of space for non-engine, plus the fact your engine's just not that good going second. It's same old Flu, same as you've always known. And speaking of same as you always known, Stun. Man, this is wow, this is still a deck that's legal to be played. I know Fossil Dyna went to 1 like a couple of balances ago. Okay, whatever. Just normal summon Barrier Statue instead. But big difference, right? It's stun. Stun do be stunning. I don't know if there's really much more to say about stun. Was there another shifter deck here that I didn't mention yet? Oh yeah, Vanquish Soul. Vanquish Soul. I don't know if Vanquish Soul is better than Flu. I'm gonna be honest. Probably better than Cashier. At least Vanquish Soul, your end board can, in an ideal situation, having a Caesar pops and like your trap card and a Raisin pop and all of that interaction can actually keep you alive versus Tenpai. So that's good. Again, it's surprisingly Cashier is out the one of the shifter decks. Cashier is the one that can run the most hand traps and most non-engines, so it might have the most going second. Whereas these are more of a struggle. I'd say people are running 3 Borgers now, at least. Some madmen are running triple Caesar Valias, although I think most are still running 2. Just because of all the hand traps around, you can use those to dodge hand traps, but you're playing against decks that have hard negates, or or U-Bell or Fire King Snake Eyes, which just put up unbreakable boards that the Vanquish Soul engine cannot break those boards by itself. So yeah, it's okay. That's all I'll say about it. It's these lower tier shifter decks aren't really the best positions for this meta. And speaking of not best positions, so Runic, this goes for every Runic variant. Okay, so I'm putting this here. Obviously Runic is way better than these 2 decks. Like any Runic variant, Mature Runic, Bestial Runic, they're way better than this. The thing is, the reason I'm putting Runic Fountain here is because I'm not convinced that any deck, any Runic variant, wouldn't be just better off cutting the Runic cards and just playing more non-engine, right? like that's what I'm thinking. Because Runic Sprite without the Runic cards is better than Runic Sprite. Live Twin Runic Sprite, I don't know if that wasn't even a deck, but yeah, obviously that's better off not playing the Runic cards. Obviously Bestial Runic isn't really a deck without the Runic cards, so that might be the one thing, but all of these decks, I feel like you're better off just running more hand traps and running different extenders instead of running Runic cards, because the problem with Runic cards, non-engine going second, against all of these decks going second, if you're just playing Runic cards, you're never gonna win games going second unless you resolve a maxi against them. And the limitation on Runic hurts so much, you're so dependent on, if you're being so dependent on Fountain when it's at 1 and every deck runs SP, that's just, and you can't end the game, so you're in prolonged game states, and then SP can dodge your freezing curses. It's just it's a nightmare to maintain. Also, even Runic Stun, I would say that I can't believe I'm saying this, but if you're gonna play a stun variant, play stuns. Don't play Runic Stun. Play Stun. This is the better stun variant. Because Runic Stun, I don't think Runic Stun runs the Floodgate monsters like Fossil Dyna and the Barrier Statues, because it wants to maintain the option of summoning its Runic monsters like Hugin or Munin or Sleipnir, depending on the situation. Which means that the only Barrier Statue you can run is Light. And if you're running Light Barrier Statue, you run into the Voiceless Voice, which is a tier 1 deck in this format that completely ignores your Floodgate monster. Doesn't sound nice. Also, what doesn't sound nice this format is Rescue Ace. So Rescue Ace, man, Rescue Ace. So here's the thing. This is the deck out of all of the tier 3 decks. I think Rescue Ace has maybe the worst Tenpai matchup. Tenpai is the exact kind of deck that Rescue Ace will struggle against. Because Rescue Ace is a deck that has a lot of interruption in its back row. And Tenpai is a deck that runs board breakers. And yeah, also Rescue Ace has no typical Rescue Ace end board has no way to interact with spell and traps, which is also another issue, because then your opponent can activate Sank and something, then you suddenly don't have a way to deal with that, and then you also lose that way. You effectively got Lightning Storm on your back row because your back row wouldn't do anything anyways. And yeah, before Tenpai, you could get away with these weaknesses because most decks in the format did not really run board breakers in a best of one format, so you could just get away with that. And obviously, Sangan suddenly didn't exist. But now the most played deck in the game always runs at least a couple board breakers. So mathematically, you're just not going to be able to rely on dodging the board breakers with Rescue Ace anymore. And you have to probably alternate, like change your turn 1 setup to include a way to deal with the spell and trap and the board breakers. So sometimes, you know, people are considering Aurora Dawn, people are going back to making Baron. I'm personally trying Terahertz because, you know, if the reason I'm doing this is to, you know, stick it to Tenpai, might as well stick it to them like extremely hard with Terahertz, which is still not a foolproof because if you get a hand trap once or twice, it makes it really hard to get to Terahertz. So if your opponent opens a combination of like a hand trap plus a board breaker, and then you can't put up your negate, then you still lose. So it's like you have to draw above average versus Tenpai to win when you go first, which is not the case for every other, you know, deck. You know, a lot of the decks, you know, relish when they go first versus Tenpai. Rescue Ace is like afraid. Also, I know people are probably going to say like Reinforce. So Reinforce, sometimes it does help, but sometimes, you know, if your opponent has the board breaker and they clear all your interruptions, the one Reinforce is not going to save you because they can still make a 6k Trident Dragon that attacks 3 times and then still like kill you through the Reinforce. So you still need to rely on a non-engine then to still be able to live even with a Reinforce. Which, you know, if they had the board wipe and they had the Sangan suddenly, it's a high chance that you don't have very much else to be able to stop them from just making that Trident Dragon to attack over your reinforced Turbulence or Preventer anyways. Yeah, this rough matchup. Against everything else, I like Rescue. I think it's fine, but just when you have a bad matchup against the most played deck, it's an issue. Oh man, there's a lot of decks I haven't covered yet. So, Labyrinth. Maybe you can consider Labyrinth. I can't consider Labyrinth here too. I think it's okay. So, Labyrinth obviously has the niche of farming Tenpai, specifically the trap builds. I think the furniture builds are actually more vulnerable to Tenpai because the furniture builds aren't the ones that are running multiple Solemn Judgments or like spell and trap protection, like Lord of Heavenly Prison or stuff like that. So Furniture Lab still gets kind of blown out by what's it called? Board breakers. But yeah, if you run protection for board breakers, like, you know, Solemns or the Runic Engine to summon Hugin to protect from Lightning Storm, Heavy Storm, and Duster, you know, stuff like that, and your traps actually resolve, you know, Deep Barrier clears, Daruma Cannon clears, like so many things. You are generally very favored versus Tenpai. And also favorable to Lab is that your worst matchup is Fire King Snake Eyes, which apparently just nobody is playing anymore. Like, I'm still shocked by that. So because nobody is playing like among your worst matchups in the game, then yeah, that's another buff to Labyrinth. This still might be a bit too high because it's still like going second against, you know, other decks just rough, like against especially against Voiceless Voice. Going second versus with Lab against Voiceless Voice is really rough because they put up an Omni Negate, and you know, you're dealing with an Omni Negate that floats every turn. It's just a nightmare. But also you do have Deep Barrier looping the Voiceless Voice player, so it's kind of maybe a coin flip matchup. So it's not unwinnable like, you know, the Fire King Snake Eyes matchup, for example. But yeah. And Centurion. Okay, so this is my controversial take, and I personally think Centurion is the most overrated deck in the game, and it's mainly due to every fucking English tier list I see on Master Duel putting Centurion multiple spots above Voiceless Voice, and I don't get it. In this meta, Voiceless Voice is so much better. It has a good Tenpai matchup, whereas Centurion, I think Centurion has like a below average to like a poor Tenpai matchup, and I think this might be a bit of like the TCG thing again, where Centurion TCG is a lot better because it has 2 more waves to support. Centurion and Master Duel is missing literally 2 waves to support right now. It's the fact that it can't even end on Blazar turn 1 consistently, if at all, which because it doesn't have Atri or the level 8 single Primus. So it's like this deck, when people talk about voice being mid and having a low ceiling, what they're really they're just describing Centurion, because like Centurion, you're ending. It's hard to play through stuff. This deck dies to a stiff breeze. Like the criticism of like Voices Way being bad going second, like Centurion is worse going second. It's so bad that you have a lot of room for hand traps, but you have to rely on your hand traps to stop your opponent. If they end on anything, right, you're like struggling playing through that, and you're not even above average at playing through hand traps, because like you only have so many extenders in your deck, like maybe around 6-ish extenders to play through something like an Ash on a Primera, but then getting Impermanent Auxilia hurts so bad because you don't get to place your Centurion name in the end phase, and you don't get to search the Fade Links. It's like cutting down like 1.5 to like 2 interruptions, and when you're in a 10x format, you're expected to play against multiple hand traps because they just have room for so many, and you're very rarely ending on anything relevant through 2 hand traps. I don't know. I don't even want to put it this high in tier 3. Like this will change obviously when we get the new support, but until we get the new support, this is I don't see what other people see in this deck. I just don't. And especially to be put above Voices Voice, which I think Voices Voice is like, as you can see, 2 tiers higher than Centurion on my tier list, but it is what it is. Like the Blazar is good. That's one thing I'll say. Blazar is good. So Infernoid. This deck is weird, bro. I don't know if this deck is better going first or going second still. I'm genuinely not sure. And also, this is a deck that runs as many bricks as it does starters. It's like you can have hands that completely blow your opponent. Reasoning, Monster Gate, Grass. Not in that order. But please don't use them in that order. But then you open hands with like 5 Inferno names, and you're like, well, the fuck do I do? It's not like I can cut these. You have to run them for names, but it's like I don't know where to go with Infernoid. Frankly, I also have not played against many Infernoid. Its deck doesn't seem to be that popular, so I don't know where this is. It's like one of the least popular decks from the previous pack. I guess for a good reason, I suppose. Paleo. Farm Tempai. That's all I'll say. That's the only purpose of this deck, I think, in this format. Like, from a competitive standpoint, farm this deck. Don't get rare rebooted. That's it. Yeah. All right. So Pearly. Okay. So this is where my cope comes in. Okay. This is I know this is probably like the most shocking placement out of everything. I think Pearly is still really good. And maybe this is like, maybe Tenpai players are running more Kaijus than I'm aware of. I don't know, but this deck draws 4 or 6 cards in the standby phase in a game where Maxi is legal. How can that be bad, right? I don't understand. Like if this deck goes first, that's enough to beat all of these things, all of these tier 1 decks, every deck above it. And it's okay. Going second, sometimes it's not that great because although you have infinite extenders, you're also like committing 2 cards for every 1 push you have. So sometimes the math don't be mathing like very well for you. But yeah, I mean, I don't see Pearly hasn't gotten any worse. In fact, I know Black Gold isn't standard, but I think Black Gold Laughs, aka Michael Jordan, is like a ridiculous card in Pearly. Just the freest discard fodder. It's good going first, it's good going second. Like you discard it for a Pearly quick play going second, then you can just break boards like that and OTK your opponent. This deck is really good, and people aren't prepared to play outs to Noir, because I mean, people just don't see this often enough. So like, why would they bother playing outs of this, right? And if you don't, then you just lose to it. So yeah, this deck's. I think this deck's solid. Like I almost wanted to put it up with, like, at the top of tier 2, but like I mean, clearly that's like that's probably just me and my take alone in that. So, yeah. Mikanko. So Mikanko as a blind second deck, Mikanko's not good. It's not that. Don't bother. There's like at least a couple better blind second decks in my opinion than Mikanko right now. But there's another way to play Mikanko, which is the general going first strategies. Either getting Ken Asagol unlocking, or the 60 card warrior is sold pile, which then then you're cooking it. You're cooking Tenpai if they make you go first. So take advantage of, like, if you have a way to build your deck to be good against Tenpai without just like playing Solemn Judgment like a billion floodgates. Like, I mean, go for it, right? It's the meta we're in. So yeah, Mikanko. I think it's still among the decks that are like pseudo FTK your opponent going first. I think Mikanko is one of it's still weirder than most of them, because it's not like these decks are like 40 cards. They have more out max C, I guess, and then this is a literal FTK, and these decks are more consistent, maybe better at going seconds. Then again, maybe you can put Mikanko here. Like, it's specifically the 60 cards like going first warrior piles, or like the Genniken Acid combo block. So it's we'll keep it like this. This is like these spots up here at the top of Rogue are a bit flexible. Raid Raptor. I don't even know why I have this in here still. I guess you can Kali Yuga your opponent if they let you. I don't know how consistent that is through hand traps. There are some hands where you're just completely immune to imperm, so you can high roll hands like that. And like, this deck's not that good going second, but I mean, when you're made to go first versus Tenpai, and you're playing a deck that has a ceiling that's as high as Kali Yuga, it's not terrible. Then I'm not sure if it's still right to go for Kali Yuga. Obviously, when Yubel was the most played deck, I think you have to go for Kali Yuga, because if you just end on Towers Turbo, like your towers are getting your towers are getting destroyed by the Phantom Yubels, because even though they're unaffected, they're not really unaffected. Yu-Gi-Oh! But now that there's less Yubel, maybe you can go for the more consistent towers lines and just pray that you don't queue into Yubel. Oh, I don't know. I still see a lot of people when they play this, they do go for Kali Yuga still. So, yeah, it's we'll put it here for now. Dragon Link. So Dragon Link. I think Dragon Link is okay. It's all right. The issue is that Bestials aren't great this format. Obviously, as you can see up from above, like, it's only really these three decks that Bestials are like excellent against, and everything else is like it's like whatever. I guess Labyrinth, depending on the build they play, they can be okay. So obviously this deck gets better the better Bestials are, but you can set up a board that always beats Tenpai still with Dragon Link in a way, although sometimes it involves playing bricks. Like, you either play like a Panda Beast or you play a Nutbuster Dragon for seals, because nobody sees that coming. Yeah, you still can get stopped, but like, if you get max seed, that's seals pass isn't the classic FTK, except not against Tenpai. Or Shifter also hurts, and their deck size is weird. Summon Sorcerers is cool. It's like a cute thing you can play. I don't know if that actually makes your deck that much better, to be honest. But yeah, we'll put this in tier 3 right now. It's a deck that has a decent ceiling, decent amount of extenders. It's just not fantastic. Doesn't have that much room for non-engine, because Bestials don't really count this format. And oh yeah, I guess voice to voice is okay, I suppose. Sometimes. It's not all Bestials aren't always good in voice to voice. Like, they can play around it and then it gets awkward, but yeah, dragons, they're all right. They're tier 3-ish. Uh, Unchained. So Unchained always sounds inferior. In theory, Unchained always sounds insane. In practice, it never works out. It's the Master Duel corollary for Unchained. Yeah, it's like the tale of it's like the story of Unchained for the rest of its life. And I'm talking about like actual Unchained. I'm not talking about Yubel Unchained, that like Yubel that plays an extra copy of Shabara or whatever, or like Yubel that means to end on Griffin Rider with a Caesar. But yeah, I don't know if the matchup versus Tenbai is good or not, to be honest, because it seems vulnerable to board breakers, I suppose. But yeah, someone more experienced with Unchained will tell me about it. Is the Ritual Beast matchup good? That also, like, I've literally never seen the Ritual Beast Unchained matchup, to be honest, and being good against multiple top tier 1 decks would like give you something. It's like a perk, but again, I'm not that experienced with the pure Unchained versus these matches specifically. I know it's like in theory it's okay versus Fire King, but people aren't playing Fire King as much, so it's not as big of a boon anymore. And Maxi is still legal, but Maxi cooks a lot of decks down here, so I guess that's why it's down here. Sword Soul, Swords. Protoss Call Fire. That's what it has. I think that's all it has. Jesus Christ, holy dude, I've been yapping forever. If you made it to the end, you're a fucking god. I'm not sure I would watch this video in its entirety myself, at least not in one sitting. But yeah, thank you if you did. And again, let me know in the comments your opinions of this and any decks I possibly missed. Oh.